Fong was given the weakest class imaginable, a level 1 farmer with no skills, no EXP bar, and no way to fight back. But after losing everything to powerful people, he enters the dungeon carrying only 10 potatoes, unaware that his first harvest will awaken a power capable of changing the entire world. For more, make sure to subscribe, and all details in description. The first goblin didn't see Fong. It stood ankle-deep in a gutter of black water, picking at something that might once have been a diver. Its ears twitched, its yellow eyes scanned the broken street. They slid right over him. Fong adjusted the straps of his canvas backpack and walked past the creature like he was late for class. A translucent panel hovered at the edge of his vision. Name, Fong Tran class, farmer level, 1 exp. Neither a bar nor any numbers, only a single dash, as if the system itself had shrugged. A year ago, when the first gate opened over the Hudson and the sky cracked like glass, people had screamed. Governments had tripped over themselves to respond. Influencers had live-streamed their own near-death experiences for sponsorship deals. Now it was Tuesday. The gate on Canal Street pulsed like a soap bubble stretched across reality. Divers in mismatched armor and branded tactical gear moved in and out, laughing too loudly and bleeding too much. Drones hovered near the perimeter, streaming feeds to research departments and news networks hungry for the next miracle mineral or pre-collapse relic. The era already had a name: modern-day gold rush. Gold just happened to bite back. Fong stepped through the gate, the world inverted with a soft, nauseating tug like being pulled through warm syrup. Then he was standing in the ruin town again. Floor 1, Eastern Habitat Cluster 7, according to Columbia's Dungeon Cartography Department. To everyone else, it was Goblin Block. Crumbling stone buildings leaned over narrow streets, moss-swallowed rooftops. Faded murals depicted a civilization no Earth historian recognized. Tall, antler-crowned figures carved into sandstone, their faces chiseled away by time. Neither skyscrapers nor wires nor tech, just bones. Bones of something old, ancient. Goblins skittered through alleys, 3 feet tall, green-gray skin, crude blades. They hissed and bickered, they ignored him. One bumped into his leg, glanced up, blinked, then scurried away. Fong didn't smile. He'd stopped finding it funny months ago. Being invisible to low-level mobs was the only thing his class gave him. There were not active skills, passives, or any stat boosts he could feel, only this strange, system-blessed irrelevance. Fong would have chosen a combat class, or even a chef class if he could. But alas, the class system was randomized, so people with production class like him were destined to be irrelevant. He walked into the central square, where a half-collapsed fountain served as a makeshift trading post. A cluster of divers were farming respawn points, pulling goblins from a side street, cutting them down, then waiting for the trickle of system notifications. A girl in mismatched leather, armor wiped her blade on a rag. A guy in a varsity jacket argued about loot rights. Fong dropped his pack onto the fountain ledge. Battery packs, he called out, for flashlights and fans, 2 for 10. Thick socks, moisture wicking, battery banks, energy drinks, cold sodas. Yes, still cold. Heads turned, not because he was important, but because he was convenient. A lanky diver jogged over. You got electrolyte tabs. Cherry or lime? Lime. Transaction complete. Cash app pinged. Modern problems, modern dungeon. Fong worked quickly, trading small comforts for small margins. It wasn't glorious, but it paid rent to his aunt and uncle back in Queens. It helped him finish a degree he already knew was useless. 3 years into urban planning. Now entire cities were studying dungeon zoning permits instead. A shadow fell across his goods. Yo. Fong didn't look up immediately. He recognized the voice. Joshua Harlan, University Golden Boy, son of a major sponsor at the university they attended. Fong finished handing a pack of AA batteries to a diver before raising his eyes. 3 of them. Branded armor with sponsor patches, fresh gear, clean blades. the kind of divers who had farmed Goblin Block often enough to think that meant superiority. Josh cracked his knuckles. "You setting up shop in our farming spot again, Tran?" Fong kept his tone even. "Public square." The guy grinned. "Public my ass. We keep this area safe, Goblin density stable, that's infrastructure." Didn't know Goblin murder came with zoning rights. A few divers nearby snorted. The grin vanished. "Protection fee," the second one said. 20%. Fong looked at his backpack, then at the thin stack of bills he'd earned so far. "I can't afford that." The tallest one stepped closer. "Then you can't afford to be here." A goblin darted between them, shrieking. None of the three bullies noticed it. Fong did. He also noticed how it didn't notice him. Josh punched the goblin's head clean in, skull cracking, green blood splashing everywhere, pure intimidation. Then he grabbed Fong by the collar. "Maybe we'll take payment in merchandise." A blade of light slid between them. A slender rapier, translucent and humming, pressed gently against the bully's wrist. He froze. A woman's voice, calm and edged like glass, cut through the square. "Let him go." She stood behind them, dark hair pulled back, leather coat cut somewhere between fencing attire and vigilante cosplay. A slim domino mask concealed her eyes, but not the authority in her posture. The psychic rapier shimmered in her hand. A second flicker of force tugged at the bully's collar. "Telekinesis. Subtle but unmistakable." "Mind blade," someone whispered. 1 in 10 million. One of the rarest classes ever recorded in the human population. The tallest bully swallowed. "This isn't your business." "Harassment inside an active dungeon," she said lightly. "Seems like everyone's business." Her rapier tilted a fraction. The message was clear. They backed off, muttering, pride wounded but survival instincts still intact. When they were gone, the rapier dissolved into motes of light. She turned to Fong. Up close, he recognized her. Alexandra Vogel, campus queen, med school, the kind of person professors referenced in speeches. Here, she wore a different name, but Fong had seen enough live stream clips to know it was her. "You're going to get killed," she said bluntly. "Statistically likely," Fong agreed. She studied him. "What class?" "Farmer." She blinked. "You're joking." "I wished." Her gaze flicked to a goblin perched on a rooftop behind him. It stared at her with murderous intent. It didn't even look at him. "Huh," she murmured. "You should hire security," she said after a moment. "Or join a team if you want to continue this kind of work." "I can't afford a bodyguard." That wasn't a joke. Neither was mine. For a second, something in her expression softened. Then the vigilante mask slid back into place. She picked up a can from his cooler. Energy drink. 4. She tapped her phone. Payment pinged. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Next time," she said, "I might not be around." Then she vanished down a side street, goblins scattering before her psychic blade. Fong exhaled. She was probably right. He'd been naive to think an ordinary guy like him could make a living as a shovel vendor in a gold rush. Turns out, spots like these were reserved for people with influence, people like Josh. Still, the pride he felt when he brought his earnings home, when he helped pay back his aunt and uncle for years of care and support, made him hesitate. Maybe a little longer, maybe until he paid off his student loans. Then he'd stop. He packed up after another hour. Sales were decent. The bullies didn't return. The deeper streets of Floor 1 were quieter. He wandered, not toward the farming clusters, but toward the outskirts of the ruined town, where the stone buildings gave way to fields of knee-high silver grass. Wind moved through it like breath. He felt it then. Not danger or notification, but something else. The soil beneath the cracked cobblestones near the edge of town looked darker than usual. Richer. He crouched, pressed his palm against it. For a split second, the world sharpened. He could feel moisture levels, density, nutrients. Then it was gone. There was neither a system window nor an unlocked skill, only a phantom sensation, like remembering a dream. "Hey, farm boy," a booming voice snapped him out of it. Fong looked up. A massive man in reinforced gauntlets and street-legal boxing boots strode toward him, armor scuffed, grin wide. He carried a tower shield like it weighed nothing. Dominic Torres, class, Judgnaut. Semi-pro boxer turned dungeon diver, built like a tank, smiling like a golden retriever. "Tell me you saved me one," Dominic called out. Fong straightened slowly. "Depends." Dominic pointed dramatically at the cooler. "Pepsi Max, please tell me you didn't sell out." Fong reached into the ice, pulled out a single cold can, and held it up. Dominic's eyes lit like he'd found treasure. "Brother," he said reverently, "you are a saint." Fong tossed him the can. As Dominic cracked it open, the metallic hiss echoed across the empty field. Somewhere beyond the silver grass, something massive shifted, the ground trembled. Dominic paused mid-sip. "You feel that?" Fong did. This time, when his palm brushed the earth, the soil pulsed back. Fong knew that tremor, a shifting event. The dungeon didn't obey tectonics. It didn't care about conservation of mass. It didn't even pretend to be acquainted with earth physics. Sometimes Floor 1 would burp, vomiting a slice of some lower biome upward while swallowing part of itself back down, like a bovine bringing up grass to chew again. Tropical marsh became frozen tundra overnight. Ruined town turned into coral forest. Divers who didn't move fast enough disappeared into places their levels had no business surviving. The ground heaved again. Silver grass rippled violently, then flattened as if something enormous had rolled beneath it. Dominic's grin vanished. "Oh, hell no." "Run," Fong said. He didn't need to say it twice. The air warped. The skyline of crumbling sandstone flickered, half the buildings phasing into jagged obsidian spires before snapping back. A fissure tore open through the square behind them, goblins shrieking as they tumbled into a red glowing abyss that hadn't existed seconds earlier. Divers screamed. System notifications cascaded in the air, glitching and overlapping. "Warning, environmental restructuring warning, floor instability." Fong ran, not toward the gate, that would already be clogged, but toward the outer ridges where terrain tended to settle instead of collapse. The soil buckled under his feet. Dominic swore, then simply scooped Fong up one-handed like he weighed nothing. "Bro, you are not dying over $20 batteries." Fong's world tilted as Dominic slung him over his shoulder like a sack of rice. The sky tore, there was no other word for it. Blue fractured into something darker. A shadow passed overhead, too large to be a creature and too deliberate to be random. Then the roar came through the air, through bone. It ripped across the landscape, like a god dragging a blade over glass. Every diver in sight dropped. Dominic staggered mid-stride, his shield slipped from his grip. Fong felt the sound hit him a heartbeat later. Sound became pressure, pressure became knives. He didn't hear himself scream. Blood burst from his nose first, then his ears. His vision exploded red as capillaries ruptured in his eyes. His mouth filled with copper. He tasted iron, bile, dirt. Something warm ran down his neck from his scalp. His lungs convulsed. Even the edges of his vision seemed to bleed. It felt like the roar had reached inside him and tried to wring him dry. Dimly, he was aware that Dominic had collapsed, still trying to shield him with his body even as unconsciousness dragged the giant down. Fong hit the ground. The earth beneath his cheek felt alive. For one terrifying instant, he thought the dungeon was swallowing him. His thoughts fragmented. This is it. Level 1, farmer, losing his life in silent irrelevancy. The roar cut off as abruptly as it had begun. Fong lay there twitching, blood seeping from his eyes, nose, ears, lips. Even his tear ducts burned. He tried to inhale and felt something tear in his chest. A hair closer. One more second of that sound and he would have burst like an overripe fruit. Footsteps approached, slow, careful. "Look at that," a familiar voice said. "Josh." Fong couldn't move, he could barely see. One eye was swollen shut, the other painted the world in smeared red. Told you he'd get what was coming, another muttered. Mind blade bitch is out cold somewhere, the third said. Whole floor dropped, perfect timing. A boot nudged his ribs. He felt it distantly, like it was happening to someone else. Still breathing. Shame. They didn't hesitate this time. A kick to his stomach, something cracked. A stomp on his shoulder, another to his face. Pain flared bright, then vanished under the greater agony already flooding his nerves. He tried to curl up, but his body wouldn't answer. They grabbed his backpack and ripped it open. Cans spilled into the grass. Protection fee, the tall one sneered. A fist slammed into his jaw that when he felt, white light exploded behind his eyes. Another punch, another. Blood sprayed the silver grass dark. You think you're special, the bully hissed. Walking around like mobs don't see you, freak. A heel ground into his hand, something snapped in his fingers. Fong almost wanted to laugh. Special. He was a level 1 farmer who sold socks. A distant part of him registered heavy footsteps, fast, angry. Hey, Dominic's voice, ragged but thunderous. The bullies froze too late. The first one flew sideways as Dominic barreled into him like a freight train, gauntleted fist driving into ribs with a wet crunch. The second raised a blade, a shield smashed into his face. The third tried to run. Dominic caught him by the back of his sponsor-branded armor and drove him into the ground hard enough to crater stone. You, Dominic roared, eyes bloodshot, blood still leaking from his own ears, touched. My friend. Each word landed with another impact. Somewhere beyond the haze, Fong thought he saw a flicker of translucent light, like a rapier forming in unsteady air. Alexandra may be dragging herself upright through the aftermath, but the world was fading, sound tunneled. Dominic's shouts grew distant. The sky above him flickered again. For a split second, as consciousness slipped, Fong felt the soil beneath his body pulse once more. Warmth seeped into him from the ground itself, threading through cracked ribs and ruptured vessels like roots searching for water. Then everything went black. Fong woke to antiseptic and ceiling tiles. For a long moment, he couldn't remember why breathing felt like dragging glass through his lungs. Then the pain rushed back. It returned in layers, ribs bound tight, scalp stitched, bruises spreading beneath gauze. His left eye was wrapped. A monitor beeped steadily to his right. Hospital, white walls, fluorescent glare, New York City murmuring beyond reinforced glass. The dungeon, the roar, the silver grass, still vivid yet so far away, like they were locked behind a dream. His phone lay on the bedside tray, cracked screen, 3% battery. He turned his head and paid for it instantly. Messages from Uncle Min. We're parking. Elevator is slow. Be there in 5. Timestamp. Yesterday, 14:12. Nothing after. Fong stared until the letters swam. They didn't come. They would have come. His aunt would have stormed in and bullied the doctors in 3 languages. His uncle would have stood there quiet but shaking, already on the phone with lawyers, news desks, anyone who might listen. They would have come. The shifting event never traveled beyond the gate. The official statement was already trending. Localized dungeon instability event, no civilian impact. Localized, contained, safe. When cameras zoomed in on a dungeon, everything outside the frame disappeared. Powerful companies operated in those blind spots. Staged accidents, brake failures, muggings in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. Josh's face rose in Fong's mind. Varsity jacket inside a death zone. Sponsor patches too clean. Son of someone important. He remembered overhearing it once in a campus hallway. Real estate, infrastructure contracts, extraction rights. Biggest university sponsor. If his aunt and uncle had sued, they would have emptied themselves into it. They weren't rich, but they were stubborn. They had crossed an ocean with nothing. They would have burned their last dollar before letting someone break him without consequence. The only reason they wouldn't be here. They couldn't be. Fong's chest seized, the monitor spiked. He tried to scream, but the sound tore at his throat like the roar had come back to finish the job. Only a strangled rasp escaped. Tears burned down his unbandaged eye, and even that hurt. Every twitch sent fresh pain through his face. He did this. If he hadn't gone into the dungeon, if he hadn't set up shop, if he hadn't been too weak to defend himself, if he hadn't needed money, maybe he wouldn't have dragged his family into something they couldn't survive. The door clicked softly. Dominic Torres filled the frame like a moving wall, no armor. A plain hoodie stretched across his shoulders, bruises darkened his jaw, dried blood stained the skin near one ear. He carried a plastic bag. "Hey," Dominic said, his voice low. Fong couldn't answer. Alexandra stepped in behind him in casual clothing. Jeans, dark sweater, hair tied back. Without the psychic rapier, she looked younger. Human. Her eyes swept the room in a heartbeat, monitors, Roman 4 lines, bandages, then they locked on Fong. The guilt on her face was plain. Dominic dragged a chair closer and dropped into it. The plastic bag crinkled. He cleared his throat. Brought contraband. He lifted a can, Pepsi Max. Condensation slicked the aluminum. Fong stared at it without blinking. Dominic's attempt at a smile collapsed. "They're investigating," Alexandra said, choosing each word carefully. "Campus security filed a report. I gave a statement." Her jaw tightened. "The police released preliminary notes," she added. "Traffic accident, likely cause, shifting-induced disorientation." Of course, convenient. Even the cause came gift-trapped with an excuse, shifting-induced disorientation. A perfect blanket to throw over anything ugly. Blame the dungeon and wash your hands. Dominic leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You didn't deserve that, any of it, you hear me?" Fong looked at them, or through them. A hollow thing wearing his face stared back. The part of him that used to calculate profit margins on batteries and soda had gone silent. In its place, one thought circled until it wore raw grooves in him. "They didn't come." Dominic swallowed. "Your family." Fong's hand jerked hard, the monitor shrieked. Alexandra stepped back on instinct, as if he had manifested a blade instead of panic. A nurse rushed in, checked his vitals, adjusted the Roman 4. Voices blurred into a wash of urgency. Dominic and Alexandra yielded to the nurse's guiding hands and slipped out. The door shut, silence settled. Night spread beyond the window. City lights blinked on like distant stars. Fong stayed awake long after the morphine dulled the sharpest edges. His phone had died hours ago. No new messages, calls, or confirmation. At that very moment, silence spoke louder than anything in the world. When his tears finally ran dry, nothing lifted. Relief never came, only emptiness, as if something essential had leaked out with the blood he'd left behind in the dungeon. He turned inward, the way divers learn to do. Status panel, it flickered into existence. Name, Fong Tran class, farmer level, 1 exp. Still nothing, a single. A laugh tried to rise and broke halfway up his throat. Of course, even now. Then the panel stuttered. A soft chime rang out. New text bled into place beneath the barren stat line. "New quest available." Fong frowned. He had never received a quest, not once. The text steadied. Quest, first harvest objective, grow and harvest 10 potatoes within the dungeon. Time limit, none failure, none reward. He stared. Potatoes. 10 potatoes. Inside a spatial anomaly that swallowed cities and roared like gods. A broken sound slipped out of him, half laugh, half sob, and even that tore at his ribs. The system had chosen this moment to hand him farming. Grow. Harvest. He lay in a hospital bed, possibly alone in the world, and the dungeon wanted him to plant. The room quieted again. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere far away. Inside, a level 1 farmer stared at a quest no one else would understand. 10 potatoes. 2 months later, Fong walked out of the hospital with a discharge folder and a debt he had never agreed to owe. Not money, but blood. The case had been resolved. That was the administrator's word. Calm smile, polished suit, all charges dropped. In exchange, Josh's father, Daniel Harlan, real estate magnate, dungeon infrastructure investor, donor to 3 hospitals and 2 universities, had generously sponsored Fong's full treatment. The press release framed it as compassion, a life-saving act. A doctor had even squeezed Fong's shoulder and said, "You should be grateful. They moved fast. If lawyers got involved, you might not be here." Grateful, Fong nodded. He learned quickly that silence hurt less. He filed inheritance paperwork alone. The house in Queens shrank without his aunt's voice bouncing off the kitchen tiles. The restaurant 3 blocks down, its red sign sun-faded, had already been liquidated. Late rent, no operator, suppliers left one by one. The garden alone remained behind the house. Neat rows, rich soil, his uncle's pride. His aunt's herbs still clung to the fence in stubborn clusters. Fong stood there at dusk with his hands in his pockets, staring at the dark earth. He didn't cry. He sold most of it. The house for the memories were too painful for him to continue living there, the restaurant equipment, the old delivery van. He kept only what he could carry, and what refused a price. A worn gardening trowel, a pair of work gloves, and a burlap sack of seed potatoes from the last supplier invoice his uncle had paid. When he returned to the gate, the air buzzed with the same manic energy. Drones above. Sponsors looked too clean they almost didn't feel human on blinking billboard. College kids in fresh armor. The modern-day gold rush hadn't paused for anyone's funeral. Fong hitched the sack over his shoulder. Neither cooler nor batteries nor sodas this time. He had only potatoes. The system was rigged. He understood that now. The rich won. They controlled courts, hospitals, narratives. Chasing revenge against men who could rewrite headlines felt childish. But the dungeon didn't care about either last names or sponsorships. It killed without preference. That was the fairest chance he had to bite back. He stepped toward the gate. Fong. He stopped. Dominic stood near the barricade with his arms crossed. He looked heavier somehow, not in muscle but in the eyes. Alexandra stood beside him. Neither mask nor blade, just Alexandra Vogel, med student, vigilante when necessary. They had both been there when the charges vanished. Press conference, corporate father shaking hands with hospital board members. Dominic had nearly shattered a podium. Alexandra had tried to rally students, threads, legal aid groups. It had fizzled within a week. Money shouted louder. "You don't have to do this," Alexandra said. "I do." Dominic's gaze dropped to the sack. "That, what I think it is." "Seed potatoes." Dominic blinked. "You're serious?" Fong nodded. He turned to face them fully. "Thank you," he said. His voice was steady, though still thinner than before, for trying, for speaking up. Alexandra's jaw tightened. "We didn't try hard enough." "You tried," Fong said. "That was enough." He didn't say what all 3 of them already knew. The hospital had folded fast. Doctors who had promised to testify changed their tone on camera. Records that had clearly described blunt force trauma quietly shifted into supersonic penetration damage. Translation: the roar did it, not good old Josh. Josh's father's company had donated a new trauma wing. Dominic looked away first. "They win," he muttered. "For now," Alexandra corrected, though the fire in her voice had dimmed. Fong adjusted the sack on his shoulder. "I'm not fighting them," he said. Both of them snapped their eyes back to him. "I'm done fighting humans." He backed toward the gate. "The dungeon doesn't care who your father is." Then he turned and walked through. Floor 1 greeted him with wind over silver grass and distant goblin chatter. Low-level mobs glanced his way, then looked past him. A slime oozed across cracked stone nearby, translucent gel wobbling as it flowed. It brushed his boot, paused, wavered, then drifted on as if he were a fence post. Good, at least that still worked. He went deeper than ever before, past Goblin Block, past the farming square, through broken arches choked with moss. He reached a low basin where ruined buildings sagged into marshy ground. Slime territory. Divers avoided it. Slimes were weak alone but miserable in numbers. They corroded gear, ruined boots, dissolved dropped items. No one farmed here unless they were desperate. No one farmed in the dungeon unless they already had nothing to lose. Actually, Level 1 farmers had no way to protect themselves and their crops. The divers had better things to do, so hire them was expensive. And to add salt to injuries, a bad luck with a shifting event could end him and his farm altogether. Fong had heard some stubborn head try to plant here regardless, even bringing his own solar panels, lighting, and security system. The dungeon got him shifted somewhere down deep under, and he was never heard of again. The only useful thing that Guy found out was the dungeon light was off. It couldn't power the solar panels for some reasons no one could explain yet. So, when other farmers heard that story, planted their first seed, and no notification came, all had wisely left the dungeon for their life. Fong did the same thing when he awakened his class. Only now, after receiving a quest reassuring him that planting here had a purpose, did he return to do what his class supposed to do. Fong found a relatively dry patch between two collapsed stone walls. The silver grass thinned there, the soil darkened. He crouched and pressed his palm into the earth. This time the sensation held moisture, acidity, nutrient density. He set the sack down and opened it carefully. 10 seed potatoes rolled into his hands, small and rough-skinned. Nothing special about them, just food, honest, filling. He pulled the old trowel from his bag. Metal scraped stone. He dug. The first cut into dungeon soil felt wrong, like slicing into something that had noticed him. He kept going. He turned the dirt. He broke clods. He worked until sweat slicked his temples despite the cool air. A slime oozed closer. It bumped his leg, paused, then flowed around him, indifferent, invisible, useless in a fight, perfect for this. Fong carved shallow trenches in a steady rhythm, the same one his uncle had drilled into him in the backyard. Spacing matters, depth matters, roots need room. He laid the first potato into the soil and covered it gently, then the second, third. By the fifth, his hands had blistered. Hospital soft skin tore against rough earth. He didn't stop. By the 10th, dungeon dusk filtered red through the broken arches. He sat back on his heels and dragged air into his lungs. 10 small mounds of turned soil marked the spot. For a moment, nothing changed. No fanfare, no glow, certainly no music or congratulation. Then a soft chime sounded. His status panel opened without him summoning it. Quest progress. 0/10 harvested growth detected. Growth detected. The soil beneath the mounds pulsed faintly, slow, steady, almost like a heartbeat. A slime drifted across one mound. The soil hissed. The slime recoiled as if it had touched a hot pan. Part of its gelatinous body dissolved. It fled. Fong stared. He hadn't moved, triggered a skill, or received a buff. But the dungeon had accepted the seeds. Wind swept through the basin. For the first time since the hospital room, something inside him shifted. Not hope, not yet. Direction. He pressed his blood-roughened hand into the dirt again. The ground answered with warmth. Farmer, level 1. Without a functioning X-bar, meaningful combat skill, or revenge just yet, only 10 potatoes in hostile soil and a dungeon that, for reasons he didn't understand, had decided to let them grow.